Patchouli here with Sirius Taurus Moon. This is Mars hour, Saturn day, and ascendant 27 degrees, applying to conjoin Venus that is leaving regulars to conjoin Ketu in Virgo, ascendant in Leo. Midheaven 24 degrees Taurus, applying to Beta Persei. Moon with Uranus, Moon Uranus, Moon Uranus. It's the monthly Moon Uranus. And is sextiling Pluto. Now, Uranus is a Kundalini rise. Uranus is the planet that is involved with the it just happens situations for particularly. Think about a situation where, let's say, the husband was cheating. And the husband said, it just happened, it just this, it just that. And the wife says, no, 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 no. You're irresponsible, and so on and so forth. Then the wifey gets a Uranus hard aspect to one of her. and and think about, what if their Uranus also rules divorce? What if they are midway into the divorce? And the wife is suing the husband. He should pay this, he should pay that. He was cheating, it was this, it was that. And then she gets the Uranus transit, because if they are in divorce, it also means that the Uranus is affecting the Missy. It's affecting both spouses. This is why I say, turn to an astrologer before you get a divorce lawyer. And you know what? Pay the divorce lawyers for the lectures that they give. Because because those are important lectures, and also pay astrologers for the information that they give. Everything that I've elaborated on Uranus, when it comes to the relational volatility, plays from something that prompts me to press record. And in my earlier videos in Spirit of Matter, I kept mentioning Jewel from Truth in Aspect Astrology. And one of the things that Jewel mentioned with Uranus is that Uranus can be the midlife crisis with the Uranus opposition, but aspects to Uranus can be those sudden relations, what Esther Perel is talking about in erotic intelligence. Some need that was repressed within the person, not necessarily by the partner, meets its sudden gush within another. Now, sometimes people experience that erotically, and sometimes absolutely not. For example, a person tending to their inner child, a person that went through sexual boundary violation, and they went through that in a hidden way, in astral. They would be looking for what? The sex that they do want. And then they say, okay, the sex that I do want also means the relationship that I do want. But it means my goals and dreams. So I'm going to go after my goals and dreams. And then they begin to have this resistance from within, and they try to find the right teachings. And then suddenly something happens, and actually their inner child is honored non-erotically. And they were like, oh, that can be a Uranus transit. So as you can see, Uranus moon, or Uranus can be confusion around the trine to Pluto, accentuate one of the remedies that can be important to facilitate going from misplaced arousal to relaxed arousal, and going from trauma bond to secure attachment. Now, if you want to be able, and here is something I asked myself when I did my business model. So that oil is patchouli oil, and it balances, it aligns the sexual energy in such a way that it doesn't oppress sexual energy, but it nourishes the soil so that we actually more easily can tend to what was the actual need in nourishment. Because there can be eroticism, even limerence is an example of that, but there can be eroticism of um, the what was missing. For example, if a child, for some reason, or infiltration of the family, or all kinds of weird rituals that have good facets and bad facets, affected the family, and the child was not able to be held. They were like an eel. It was impossible to hold them. Then they might eroticize the need for care. So they might try to meet that need through eroticism. Okay, for example, much of the Epstein dossiers worked on depriving infants from care, and then attempting to meet that, and then have them attempt to meet that, so that will be provided for them in the most unusual of circumstances, and it can play into Uranus. Okay, Uranus transits. For example, the Pluto Virgos had Pluto Uranus conjunction. And back then we discovered chaos, but there was also an attempt to control the life energy. Okay, so if there would be two people that were harmed as infants, and harmed is severe, as you can see, then even when it's invisible, then they would deprive them of any healing, sometimes because people didn't know, and sometimes it would go by depriving them of healing, and then the younger person would have an older person permeating their body sexually, and the older person would experience themselves being seduced by a child that meets their most erotic needs and unmet needs in the most unusual way. Sorry for the trigger, Annika Lucas. I know that this is probably what they try to do with me, and I grew up in a family where my mother wanted to have children. Yes, of course, when she insisted on birth that is natural, and there were lunar nakshatra incompatibility between both me, my mom, my dad, and my dad. Elite family. No, we were not growing elite in terms of like the money, but but this is something that I saw a lot in elite families. Um, and then not only that, once we have even the um, lunar karmic rope, and we would have the lunar karmic rope, then we would look for lunar compatibility. And then the lunar compatibility would come from the most unusual places. Oh, what moons are actually not in a karmic rope nakshatra with me? Oh, the problem. Okay. That's an and this is where we see how that depriving of actual care that happens in through rituals and through things that were affecting families permeated the situation where the people that would be compatible, um, for example, I did not have children. One of the people that would have, that my moon would be after the moon, basically, if there would be my child, let's say, then as mother, it would be easier for my moon to go and to cater to their emotional needs, because I would naturally be inclined to do so. Their moon, and this is Lada Duncheva teaching that was relational, but I took it outside of romantic relations into the general case where my energies would follow through to their energies. One of these people is person that in jurisdiction is involved with molesting boys. And energy that came from him showed me how a woman that was pregnant and was harmed during pregnancy could be in the upbringing of a person that could molest boys. Now, when I was doing the tending to my emotional needs and so on, to bring in the moons that are after mine. I had both karmic rope nakshatra, karmic rope on the moon, and situation where the moon of, let's say, my male friend, was before my moon, which is not compatible. Let's say I was not trying to have romantic relation at all, but this is also karmic rope nakshatra where I was also tending to my inner child, so I could also not be kind of like a standing mom, and the need is authentic. I believe Teal Swan talks about adaptively meeting our needs, and then when I reached the moons that were behind my moon, there were already weird things happening, and actually it was one of those moons that saw immediately the need for the non-erotic self, but I think that they were using them, or that maybe they went to torture and they were using them to try to do something that is not so, let's just say, even a little bit Epstein. I'm not saying he was from Epstein list. I'm saying that it could be that he was either tortured or mind hacked or something like that. And indeed, the need that I needed was the non-erotic. Now, when we discover something like that, there can be the how should I say, when stagnant energy begins to have motion, there can be irregularities in the life energy, and that's Uranus. Now with Uranus trine in Pluto, oil, essential oil, can be a great remedy. An oil that balances the sexual energy in a way that it doesn't oppress the sexual energy, but it doesn't bring the eroticism. How should I say, if what we need is a hug, then we're not going to go for trying to meet that with sex. Um, and this is patchouli oil. By the way, people that have patchouli oil as their favorite oil, it can be that this oil has contributed to recovery from molestation, and maybe even discovering authentic sexuality. I'm not sure, because it could have helped to balance. With molestation, people have erotization of something that never truly meets. I even discussed the fact that there was a part where, when I was in therapy, in psychodynamic therapy, unfortunately, there was astral encounter from the therapist to me, which completely offset everything, but it triggered the inner child dynamics that happen in such molestation dynamics. And the inner child was not looking for father to make a decision for her, but it was looking for father that is inspiration. And it was looking to have, and there was something it was looking to have, a positive sexual experience where there was a negative one. And those are patterns that can create re-traumatization. To dissolve them, this is where adding, for example, something like patchouli oil can assist in being more accurate and dissolving those patterns, because it's also antifungal for that sense. Um, where's my patchouli oil? And all that I'm saying is knowledge from experience, and I think that now, and by the way, it's also important to know that people that are recovering from any sort of such thing, they are combating or facing with forces that wanted them in those extortion codes and unusual dynamics. This is also something to be considered when we think about recovery. And this is why I'm not so in favor of the drug option for pedophiles in prison. The thing that Meloni offered, and I really love that she addressed that, because she understood that pragmatically there's way more people in the elite that are pedophiles, and we need to give them a venue of something that is not jail, because being either victim or perpetrator is being in constant jail. And by the way, one of the initiations, or supposedly spiritual initiations, um, were meant to try to make these people feel free in jail. Now, because they would bring children at puberty, then the mothers were also the energy. They would experience the mother as also sexually abusive. And in many cases, the mother was indeed so that's my patchouli oil. Now, because of the fact that they had to do treason, this added to the eroticizing the needed emotional care, and it added limerence, and limerence would be used to create scandals. I remember I once joked about it when I say I make sex scandals sexy again, because they were torturing me at around 2022, 2023. Um, but which of course there is nothing funny about. Eventually, it was not scandal, but a pedo ring drop, and I exposed the mechanisms of scandals. Um, yeah. Yeah, why Putin was the richest man in the world? Well, he put all the oligarchs in jail, and then he asked for them for ransom for 50% towards him. So he was centralizing the wealth, and he became richest man known in the world. Another one was Mark Rich, and Mark Rich did business, that any type of business, and nobody heard his name until he died. And he was trading, very simply put, everything. He was, again, and this is also where we see the risks of poverty, because this type of people, Mark Rich was, for example, kind of like a Second World War kid, the type where the chocolate with the cadmium would be longed for. And this is exactly the patterns of eroticism that I'm talking about. It's the deprivation, not just of the elite, but the elite is not exempt from that. In fact, is the most susceptible sometimes. Now, business-wise, anybody that promotes, and it's going to be a profound shadow work, okay? I asked myself, and I told Albina that, I asked myself when I was just beginning with basically trying to work on a business, millennial consuming all the motivational quotes by all the people that they call reptilians now. and but it's also create a situation where we found out that there can be wealth that's actually wealthy. It comes with secure attachment and honoring child self and honoring erotic and non-erotic self, which is relaxed arousal. And there have been around Uranus Taurus generations, entire generation that began to, men and women, gay and straight, that began to apply these. Now, it's a profound shadow work that I cannot even, by the way, the spirulina it did not go to waste. Now, and what we actually discover is that any business, if you want to be able to sell to the rich, anything that would align them with coming out of trauma bond into secure attachment, honoring erotic, non-erotic self, you are basically, and without judgment, you are basically an alternative to the Rolodex, the Epstein dossiers, and everything that bonded and extorted them from the get-go. This would also be able to release the dividends in the form of policy changes. For example, Putin arranged the infrastructure in Russia, and he was known. In fact, one of the reasons that, according to the Profit or United States, has allocated money to correct, to beautify the infrastructure. Well, I don't know if it was around the time when Putin was doing that in Russia, but just think about the fact that diplomats go to a meeting in Russia and they see even the rural areas looking beautiful, the roads. I remember the roads in France when I was, I think it was the end of the 90s, how the roads in France were looking, the experience of my parent driving through. Um, and those dividends can be released on a way more optimal level when we have grassroots movement to have secure attachment, relaxed arousal, honoring child self, because, and then the elite are going to want to have that too. Probably a lot of them already do, because this is the antidote to what's been extorting them. And by the way, what's been extorting them was exactly the infrastructure of banking and, okay? And yes, the glass ceilings, there are things that are very challenging, very difficult. I have comic rope with Elon Musk, who is doing a bank himself. And I witnessed a situation where it's not impossible that something was presented to him as healing some sort of mother or child wounds, and then I was harmed. So I believe that not only I was harmed, again, I was tortured, so it's not like I was too much of an agency there, but they tried to get me to want to have children. And I'm like, well, to have children, we need orgasmic birthing. We need, but the upbringing to be good. The children need to have, a present father or present two parents. I need to tend to my inner child. There are many things, and they're very powerful at using kind of like an alternative reality that is a sensory one. So, and now that I see that he's working on a bank, I'm like, well, they wanted him they wanted him to not cross the glass ceiling of secure attachment and relaxed arousal, because they still wanted some sort of stranglehold of the banks. Also, in certain societies, being a goddess was being murdered, being a empress was being trafficked, being I don't know, any type of role, and then the lower roles were being all those things and even more mistreatment. It shows us of the deprivation of empires that went by that, which is most empires, but it's also a point of interference, because if you want to sell to the rich, coming with products and services that support secure attachment and are not a trafficking version of those, and this is going to be very difficult um, glass ceiling to break, because the trafficking is what gets people assassinated. My Navamsha chart has Moon in the 10th house, Sun in the 4th house. And one of the things that I reached when I was growing into my Navamsha, 36, 37, was people are leaders, leaders are people. And then my Pluto square was I'm with power, I'm in power, I'm with power. I cannot tell more about this mantra that I reached through something. Um, and this was where I understood that to abolish those things that Annika Lucas and many are talking about is imperative to have any sort of representation, both from the business people level, from the politicians level, from the people level, from the leaders level. And this is why all of us are going through this shadow work and transmutation, and why a lot of these things or knowledge from experience are relevant to literally everybody. Um, so patchouli oil, if we add mint, I don't have, I want to do a mint patchouli here. Mint was something that I noticed that got people that were addicted to cocaine um, to have the willpower to stop the addiction. They returned to smell as well. I was in a shelter and I was sharing that with a person that was addicted to cocaine. One of the things that really impressed me was how tidy they were, how disciplined they were, and how much of like the first thing they said to me was that they don't want to hear about my stories. They don't want to hear about my things. Everybody tells them their stories. So, and um, and I also witnessed how many things were working in a way that was challenging their healing. And this is because people that don't want to be um, with the people that kill people, let's say, are basically put on drugs by force, so that they will be trafficked or that they will be, and that person was working in the security, but they also they kind of like they had to do things for to get the drug. Um, and indeed, I saw that my willingness to see entire humanity deaths, not even depopulation as euthanasia, was my integrating the predatory or the violent component that was putting that on the table so that we can actually get into proportion and diminish, the other things. And another thing that can facilitate is nourishment, when people actually get, I don't know, their spirulina or their mankai or their acai or the natural growing herbs or the essential oils. Now, where is mint? I think I saw this is probably mint. So I'm going to do a little bit of a blend. A little bit of a blend here. Let's get the patchouli and mint. So patchouli and mint. Now patchouli also not net. No. Recording later. Something funny. Later. Patchouli already has a little bit of a quasi minty. Um, Now here is the drama. All those things that are associated of healing. Think about even the fact that having a space to do the prep for orgasmic birthing, whether it's the breathing, learning to orgasm in birth positions, um, draining the fascia, and by the way, even aligning the bone of the toe structure, which takes exercise, and it's taking out the trauma in the body. It's screaming, it's everything. And by the way, when I learned by Fred Wolfson about sexuality that is embodied, that is not trafficking, then usually what is the first thing? People need a space to do that. What kind of a space? Either a house that is more isolated, or a room in a Zimmer. And then what were all these space used for up until now? Epstein dossiers. And it's rejuvenating what's happening in those spaces, as well as acknowledging that all people needed those spaces to be able to have, even if we think in fertility terms, happy upbringings and happy life. And then we come to understand that the people that didn't have that weren't even seen as people. They were seen in a way that dehumanizes. Now, the fact that the elite had the big houses but did not have the microcosmic orbit as orgasmic birthing within the elite is an important thing to know, because otherwise people are just going to do the eat the rich thingy. Like, we don't need to eat the rich are eating themselves at a but and this is the gnosis of the bigger sun. But it's true. Everybody was waiting for the but it's true. So I've added some mint. Gonna work with the patchouli. Is this the patchouli? Not really. But is this? I hope it is not. Okay, this has patchouli in it. Patchouli mint. Okay, the mint is strong. But this is going to be an interesting composition. Yes, I speak on oils in terms of compositions. It's going to be very, very high concentrate with some sandalwood here. Now I have something. Where art thou? back, back. Oh, nee. Oblipicha. Where art thou? Something that is oily. Okay, I'm going to fix it with this quantity that is already tiny but powerful, just to get the sniff of it. Okay. And probably needing to mix it more. Oh well. I'm probably going to have to. It's very tender. Okay. Now, trying to get them into with patchouli. Okay, now I get it. This is amazing because the mint awakens and the patchouli balances the sexual energy. And by the way, the people that were addicted to trafficking, namely the people that cannot even conceptualize a woman. And again, everything in society was meant so that they wouldn't be able to conceptualize a woman. That was the way to get them mind controlled, no matter how much money and power they have. Then they need to work on that concept. They need to work on being able to conceptualize a woman without seeing everything as, I'm sorry, prostitute. They see even girls as prostitutes. Now you think, oh, what kind of barbaric? I'm talking about the elite here. I'm talking about the top roles in intelligence. I'm talking about um, not everyone, but and not only the rich people, but these shows of people that were really addicted. Think about the fact how normalized it is for Israeli people to go to Thailand and pay to basically rape girls and boys. And then they see everything they cannot conceptualize, so they see everything as a prostitute because they cannot conceptualize. Now it's impossible to work in such an environment or to live in such an environment. Um, and even the people that have testimonies, they ask for the gruesome words so that they try to attach the definition or the tag or the concept of to the person. Um, אה, אוקיי, פתרו לך את כל הבעיות. Now, patchouli mint. Now here's the thing. This is also why during Uranus Taurus, a lot of people, as they were learning about actually honoring the inner child, honoring erotic, non-erotic self, the friction eventually with the previous world created the petering drop. And that exposed also, there was a movement around various shapes of genitalia normalization. And that also was contributing to later removing the shame from the people that were in close societies, namely the elite, that could have had whether anomalies in their genitalias as well, and genetic anomalies. They basically made them to feel like it's natural for an old man to be with a young child in terms of fertility, also because of the physical, and all of these things were by design. Um, when it comes to food, it also created craving foods that are not. People even think about it. A lot of people say, oh, the only thing that helped them is, let's say, weed or something like that. And then immediately they crave the food that is the most unhealthy food. While the food is actually anti-inflammatory is important. let's say when we work about such issue as stagnation or fungal infection or even worse things, then we need the antioxidants. We need the niacin. We need the nervous system supporting fats. Um, and we need to change the culture that is treason based. Okay, a lot of mafias or organized crime were priding themselves on basically structure which is not compatible for governance, that is inclusive. To begin with, people were more susceptible to go into crime because they were not included in the organized structure, because they're not compatible with the same infrastructure. Saturn retrograde, for example, I know from deceased astrologer Tom Waits, not that, that Saturn retrograde requires for reinventing time, schedule, dedication. Um, and Saturn is also orthodoxy. So now, um, is the solution of the people that have money to buy land enough? No. It just think what Putin did to get ahead of all the oligarchy. He put all the oligarchs in jail, and they had to pay him 50%. Now, you can't say, oh, that's a crook or that's greedy, because he was unsatisfied with the environment of the oligarch. Okay, to put them in jail, you have to be in a certain position already. Um, so if people are just going to buy land, and we see that, I saw people that were living off grid, suddenly people harass them, or suddenly the quality of the air is not so good, or suddenly they ban off grid, or suddenly they allow off grid, um, because it's a global route towards the Balgadi. And all another Putin has to do is basically take the mob, so to speak, which is simply people that were deprived of resources, and have them take over half the land of each person that has land. In India, we see that there are a lot of people that are going against castes. I actually really appreciate Carpio for talking about the fact that nobody actually has to work under anybody with the technology that we have. And a lot of people, I think, underestimate how powerful it is for a person coming from caste system based society to say that. So um, big shout out and reverence to my unofficial teachers. Um, Now here's another thing that those rituals or the treason based um, societies do. They make it difficult to be collegial. And this is something that needs, because essentially when the person is aligned with themselves, they're gonna see that their innovation usually is some sort of a friction that they have, let's say, with existing um, product. Is like, oh, that product is fantastic. Either they cannot get the money to buy it, and then they have to try to do it for themselves, and then might get the money to buy it, and say, oh, wait a second, I need to complete that, or I need to refine that with something, and then they try from another company, and then say, well, maybe that, and then they come up with something, and that something is their contribution. Um, there are a lot of fates, even when it comes to astrology, sorting the wheat from the chaff. And that's also something I was telling Carpil, because a lot of he was saying, oh, the Rahu remedy, the best Rahu remedy is to get off the phone. He called it a marriage remedy, and I see societies that don't have phones, and it's not exactly a remedy for the. Whereas the Amish people, then, and privacy can only. A lot of people talk about privacy. Privacy we can only have when nothing bad happens in the private sphere. Now, and the quest for privacy in the age of air is okay. Yeah. Like 20 years from now, we're going to have Pluto in Pisces, an outer planet in Pisces, in tropical Pisces. Everything is everything is isolated and it's so. Um, but this is where I was saying, well, we need to tend to, let's say a person gets off their phone, then they're being tortured and harassed and so on. So they get on the phone, and it's kind of like a call for help. Uh, but I really like the tea remedy. I noticed that when on my Rahu return, I was drinking a lot of tea. And um, and he says that Ketu is a dog. So um, I don't have a dog, but it's also, yeah. To have a dog, we need to be able to care for a dog. And when I tend to my inner child, before I teach my inner child responsibility, it needs to be safe for my inner child to be a child. And and that can I try to think what collides with my Ketu. My ascendant is squaring my midheaven, but my Lilith is squaring. Yeah, my Lilith is in orb to square, almost 10-degree orb, but in orb to square my Ketu. And indeed, it's those issues. Lilith in the first house is something that infanthood, where the infant was supposed to be the woman that would not be subjugated, and that was very weird position, and that is impossible position on an infant. And um, think about the colonization, which is a Rahu quest, where the empire hasn't been before, and how tea and the herbs of tea played a big role in the expeditions. Nutmeg. And by the way, I was using nutmeg essential oil. There was an issue with nutmeg essential oil. Um, that was showing me that something got infiltrated in my friend environment. Um, and yeah, and it was also showing me that I wasn't able to like run a business or give consultations to people with aromatherapy, because I needed to tend to the soles of my feet that needed to have soil, but they needed to have enriched soil, which basically, or rich soil, which basically means my infant self. Or if we think about the feet of the baby, think about rock rose essential oil, or cistus essential oil, the feet of the baby, sandalwood as well. Patchouli is great to combine with any oil like orange, or any oil like mint. You can add some orange, in fact. And those oils, well, orange is also good for our breathing. And this is where we want to be present in the body, to be able to breathe deeply, but also not to trigger the repetitive erotization of the non-erotic pattern that's trying to meet. And it can be seen as rising in the sexual energy or sexual drive, when underneath the drive is actually a quest for nourishment. Um, a lot of these topics, minus the oils, were addressed with, if I think about it, in my apprenticeship, one of the people that were the patient um, wanted to try one single oil to see what it does, and I was always listening to my patients and never enforce anything. That oil, what it did was, it was orange oil and it was awakening the sexual energy, but for that they would need something like patchouli. 5 years later. and and that created probably awakening of all the things that were laying dormant, not only in them but in all the people that would try to mind control them. um, and then unfortunately they projected their false perceptions of on the feminine on me, which was a complete surprise to me, because they were the person that was actually a point of awareness at the Me Too, which was also why I refused to project any bad things onto them, even when I was literally tortured. Um, and it could be an infiltration from the Epstein that was trying to get at him, but that was definitely causing a separation. Now, um, but this also means that the natural process, when it comes to, um, yes, essential oil. Again, I was a student back then. I was myself basically doing the apprenticeship, um, but I would not think that something that like we weren't even trying to treat anything to do with sexual energy, but naturally the life energy is and the lack of flow in life energy is the cause for all diseases, and that has to do with the infiltration of the Epsteinis in modern times. But in previous times, there were those weird perceptions that kept everyone, particularly the elite aristocracy, the monarchy, um, hostage to, and then they would even, for example, if they would have access to any healer or therapist, unlike me, that didn't know, for example, oh, my patient wants to see what one oil does and see how that affects them, and I'm like, I'm going to go with the intuition of my patient because they know themselves better than me. Then they would have the people that would be probably obligated to commit a treason, giving them, hey, why won't you use orange essential oil, then take them to be filmed with children or something, with the smugness that they can get away, and then show, oh, what does this and this person do, or ask for dividends that were supposed to be the public housing of, let's say, the people in the kingdom. So, um, now, this is also why Holocaust survivors, the people that survived the camps, Jews and not, they didn't want them. They didn't want them to recover and to speak because they would probably expose everything that I'm talking about. And then they will see that it's the same with those that were the perpetrators. That that's how they created the perpetrators um, of these things. Um, Look at this ascendant. Look at this ascendant and the midheaven. The midheaven. But now the midheaven is applying to Aldebaran. Midheaven Mars. Um, and by the way, when people, for example, have issues or problems with, let's say, like the apprenticeship thing that I made, that I don't even know to tell if it was a mistake, um, because I wouldn't go with something other than what my patient tells me, without saying like, oh, for example, oh, that could raise, right now I could say, oh, that could raise the sexual energy, and then we might want to try that with the patchouli, or we might want to even begin with the patchouli, which is completely different directive than we would get. It's just, I was like, oh, I've just renovated your aromatherapy. that um and by the way, if I had the patchouli there with me in the shelter rather than the mint alone, maybe that person would be more successful already then to come out of drug addiction. But if anyway they hear it, then mint and patchouli. Um, and more things to say. And then people say usually, oh, people should get certification and so on. This actually happened to me when I did certification. But also, essentially, I did not want to work with the seers. Um, and that person was stepping on the wound of my tending to these topics to begin with, to recover from, and then it was becoming an Epstein. Um, Now, of course, what happens when you meet that with a person that's supposed to be a patient? To me, it happened with a psychologist, but when I was the patient. But what happens when then it's not about blaming the patient, it's about dropping the petering, but you actually need to have the infrastructure that can allow that, because that was supposed to be me going out of food stamps to a work that is actually compatible with me, which of course was completely ridiculous considering that I needed my inner child to be safe and free to be a child. Okay, so I almost became the weird, fortunately for me, I did not become the weird therapist like my psychologist, um, but it's also prevented me from, let's say, um, taking on people, and then if people think that they come to something like an Epstein Island when they come to treat a disease, then we won't have also aromatherapist. We won't have anybody, because the therapists don't want to be harassed. And this is where, by the way, when I was basically violated by my therapist, he tried to make it look like, and then smear campaign. But in that case, I know that um, they targeted my friend that I did the apprenticeship on, because he was there for me at the Me Too, and they wanted